The radio crackled once, then died. Corporal Nathan Rivers pressed a handset against his ear, listening to nothing but static and the distant thump of mortars landing somewhere to his left. He tried again. "Baker Company, this is Able 7. Do you copy?" Silence. He looked down the trench line, both directions, and saw no movement. No helmets. No rifles. Just mud, abandoned gear, and the smell of cordite drifting to the jungle air. The line was gone. It was November 1943, and the island of Bougainville in the Solomon Islands had become a killing ground. The Americans had landed weeks earlier, pushing inland through mangrove swamps and dense jungle to establish a defensive perimeter around their beachhead. The Japanese, dug into the interior, launched relentless counterattacks every night, probing for weak points, trying to push the invaders back into the sea. The perimeter was a patchwork of foxholes, machine gun nests, and communication trenches carved into the volcanic soil, all connected by narrow trails that disappeared into the darkness under a canopy so thick that even midday felt like twilight. Rivers was 23 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who had enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. He had never imagined himself a soldier. Back home, his life had been predictable. Morning chores, fields of corn stretching to the horizon, Sunday dinners with his family. War had seemed distant, something that happened to other people in other places. But after the attack, something shifted inside him. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was a quiet, stubborn sense that if he didn't go, someone else would have to. Someone with a family, maybe, or someone who wasn't as strong. So he went. Boot camp had been brutal, but he had survived it. The Pacific was worse. The heat, the insects, the diseases that turned men into hollow-eyed skeletons. The fear that never left, not even in sleep. But Rivers adapted. He learned to move quietly, to spot tripwires, to shoot fast and accurate. He learned that survival meant being alert every second, that hesitation killed you, and that the jungle was never empty, even when it looked that way. His unit, Able Company, had been assigned to hold a section of the perimeter along a ridgeline that overlooked a narrow trail. It was a critical position. The trail was one of the few routes the Japanese could use to move men and supplies toward the American beachhead. And if they controlled it, they could flank the entire defensive line. Rivers and his squad had spent 3 days reinforcing their foxholes, setting up fields of fire, and clearing underbrush so they could see anything approaching. It was hard, exhausting work, but it felt like progress, like control. Then, 2 nights ago, everything changed. The Japanese launched a massive assault all along the perimeter. Artillery pounded the American positions for hours, followed by waves of infantry charging to the darkness, screaming, firing, throwing grenades. The Americans fought back desperately, but the enemy kept coming. Rivers' squad held their position through the first night, but by dawn, they had lost 4 men. The second night was worse. A mortar round landed directly in the trench to his left, killing everyone there instantly. Another squad on his right was overrun. Rivers heard the gunfire, the screams, then silence. By morning, his lieutenant was dead, his squad leader was missing, and the radio was damaged. Now, standing alone in the trench, Rivers tried to make sense of what had happened. He had fallen asleep for maybe an hour before dawn, exhausted, and when he woke, the other men were gone. Not dead, just gone. He searched the area, calling out quietly, checking foxholes and shelters. Nothing. No bodies, no gear, no sign of where they had gone. Either they had pulled back during the night without waking him, or they had been quietly killed and dragged away. Neither option made him feel better. He climbed out of the trench and moved carefully along the ridgeline, staying low, scanning the jungle. The trail below was empty, but he could hear movement in the distance. Voices, metal clanking. The Japanese were out there, regrouping, preparing for another push. He returned to his position and checked his ammunition. He had his M1 Garand rifle, 8 clips of 8 rounds each, 64 bullets total. He had 2 grenades. He had his bayonet. That was it. The logical thing to do was retreat, find his unit, regroup, report the situation. But Rivers looked at the trail again and realized something. If he left, the Japanese would move freely through this area. They would flank the American line. Men would die because he abandoned his post. He thought about his lieutenant's last order, shouted over the chaos 2 nights ago. Hold this position no matter what. The lieutenant was dead now, but the order still echoed in Rivers' mind. He made a decision. He would stay. He would hold the line alone. And if the Japanese came, he would make them pay for every inch. Rivers spent the next 2 hours preparing. He knew he could win a straight firefight against a large force, so he had to be smarter. He studied the terrain, the angles, the natural cover. The ridgeline gave him elevation and visibility. The trail below funneled enemy movement into predictable paths. He identified 3 firing positions along the ridge, each with a clear view of different sections of the trail, and he moved between them, memorizing the routes, clearing obstacles, setting up small piles of ammunition at each spot. The first position was a shallow foxhole near a fallen tree, offering cover and a wide field of fire. The second was behind a cluster of boulders about 30 yards to the left, providing concealment and a side angle on the trail. The third was a depression in the ground another 20 yards beyond that, partially hidden by ferns and vines. The plan was simple. Fire from one position, then move quickly to the next before the enemy could pinpoint him and return fire. Keep moving. Keep them guessing. Make them think there were multiple defenders. It was a desperate plan, and Rivers knew it. But desperation was all he had. Around midday, he heard them coming. Voices, footsteps, the rustle of equipment. He crouched low in the first foxhole, peering through a gap in the tree roots. A moment later, the first Japanese soldiers appeared on the trail below. They moved cautiously, rifles ready, scanning the jungle. Rivers counted them. 6 men, then 8, then 12. More kept coming, a full squad, maybe more. They were advancing in a loose column, spread out, disciplined. These weren't inexperienced troops. They knew what they were doing. Rivers steadied his breathing. His hands were shaking slightly, and he forced them to stop. He had been trained for this. He knew how to shoot. He knew how to stay calm. He repeated his training instructor's words in his mind. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger. Make every shot count. He waited until the lead soldiers were directly below him, about 50 yards away. Then he aimed carefully at the nearest man and fired. The crack of the M1 echoed through the jungle, and the soldier dropped instantly. Rivers shifted his aim, fired again. Another man fell. The rest scattered, shouting, diving for cover, trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. Rivers fired 3 more times, fast, precise, and 2 more soldiers went down. Then he grabbed his rifle and ran, crouching low, moving quickly to the second position behind the boulders. The Japanese opened fire on the first position, bullets tearing through the foliage, shredding the tree roots where Rivers had been moments before. He reached the boulders, dropped into cover, and waited. The enemy fire slackened as they realized they were shooting at an empty foxhole. Rivers could hear them shouting orders, regrouping. He peeked around the edge of the boulder and saw several soldiers moving up the slope toward the first position, trying to flank it. He aimed and fired. 1 man fell. He fired again. Another dropped. The rest turned toward the boulders, confused, tried to locate the new firing position. Rivers fired twice more, then moved again, sprinting to the third position in the depression. The Japanese were now thoroughly disoriented. They had taken casualties from 3 different directions and had no idea how many defenders they were facing. Rivers heard an officer shouting, trying to rally the men, organize a coordinated assault. But before they could regroup, Rivers fired again from the third position, dropping another soldier. The enemy returned fire wildly, spraying bullets into the jungle, hitting nothing. Rivers stayed low, reloading his rifle, breathing hard. This went on for nearly an hour. The Japanese would advance. Rivers would fire from one position, kill 1 or 2 men, then move and fire from another angle. The enemy couldn't pin him down. Every time they concentrated fire on one spot, he was already gone, shooting at them from somewhere else. The trail below became littered with bodies. The Japanese grew more cautious, more hesitant. They stopped advancing and took cover, waiting, trying to figure out what they were up against. Rivers crouched in the first foxhole again, reloading. He was down to 4 clips, 32 rounds left. His arms ached from carrying the rifle. His legs burned from running back and forth. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. He looked down at the trail and counted the bodies he could see. 11, maybe 12. He wasn't sure. Some had been dragged away by their comrades. He felt nothing when he looked at them. No guilt, no satisfaction. Just a cold, mechanical focus on the next shot, the next movement, the next decision. Then he heard engines, distant at first, then louder. Vehicles. The Japanese were bringing reinforcements. Rivers felt his stomach tighten. He couldn't fight vehicles. He couldn't stop an entire company. His plan had worked against a single squad, but if they brought more men, heavier weapons, he was finished. But the engines didn't come closer. They stopped somewhere down the trail, maybe half a mile away. Rivers listened carefully. Voices. Shouting. Orders. The Japanese were consolidating, reorganizing, preparing for a larger assault. That gave him time. Not much, but some. He used it to reposition his ammunition, check his remaining grenades, and drink water from his canteen. His hands were filthy, covered in mud and gun oil. His uniform was soaked with sweat. He realized he hadn't eaten since the previous night, but he wasn't hungry. Fear had killed his appetite. As the afternoon wore on, the Japanese tried again. This time they were more organized. They split into two groups, one advancing directly up the trail, while the other moved through the jungle to the left, attempting to flank the ridge. Rivers saw them coming and knew he had to act fast. He fired at the group on the trail first, dropping 2 men, then shifted his position and fired at the flanking group, forcing them to take cover. He moved again, fired again, kept them pinned down. But there were too many of them now. He couldn't cover both angles at once. One of the flanking soldiers got close enough that Rivers could see his face. The man raised his rifle, aiming directly at Rivers' position. Rivers fired first. The man fell backward, disappearing into the undergrowth. But more were coming. Rivers pulled the pin on one of his grenades and threw it toward the flanking group. The explosion was deafening and screams followed. He didn't wait to see the result. He ran to the second position, reloaded, and fired at the group on the trail again. The battle became a blur. Time lost meaning. There was only the rhythm. Aim, fire, move, reload, fire again. Rivers stopped thinking about tactics or strategy. He acted on instinct, muscle memory, pure survival reflex. His mind went quiet, empty of fear, empty of thought. There was only the rifle, the target, the next breath. At some point, the Japanese pulled back again. Rivers didn't know why. Maybe they had taken too many casualties. Maybe they thought they were facing a larger force and decided to wait for artillery support. Maybe their officers were dead and survivors had lost cohesion. Whatever the reason, the shooting stopped. Rivers collapsed in the foxhole, gasping for air. His ears were ringing from the gunfire. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He checked his ammunition. 1 clip left. 8 rounds. 1 grenade. That was all. If they came again, he wouldn't last long. But they didn't come. The jungle fell silent except for the buzz of insects and the distant calls of birds. Rivers waited, listening, watching the trail. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Still no movement. As darkness approached, Rivers heard new sounds. American voices. He froze, listening carefully, making sure it wasn't a trick. Then he saw them. Soldiers in American uniforms moving cautiously along the ridge, rifles ready. He called out, identifying himself. They rushed forward, surrounding him, checking him for wounds, asking what happened. Rivers tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled. He pointed at the trail, at the bodies below. One of the soldiers, a sergeant, stared down at the scene and whistled softly. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "How many were there?" "I don't know," Rivers said. They kept coming. The sergeant sent men to scout the trail and secure the area. They returned an hour later with a count. 46 enemy dead. 46. All killed by 1 man over the course of 6 hours. The news spread quickly through the unit. Men came to see Rivers, to shake his hand, to ask him how he did it. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't felt brave. He had just done what needed to be done. He had held the line because no one else was there to hold it. Later, Rivers learned what had happened to his unit. They had been ordered to pull back during the night to reinforce another position that was about to collapse. The runner sent to wake Rivers had been killed by a sniper before reaching him. And in the chaos, everyone assumed Rivers had already retreated with another group. By the time they realized he was missing, it was too late to go back. They thought he was dead. But Rivers wasn't dead. He had stayed. And because he stayed, the Japanese advance along that trail had been stopped. The flank had held. The perimeter had held. Lives had been saved. Rivers was later awarded the Silver Star for his actions that day. During the brief ceremony, an officer read the citation, describing his courage, his skill, his determination. Rivers stood at attention, expressionless, feeling like the medal belonged to someone else. The man described in the citation sounded like a hero. Rivers didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. He felt lucky. He felt relieved that it was over. But it wasn't really over. The island fighting continued for weeks. Rivers returned to his unit and kept fighting. He survived Bougainville, then moved on to other islands, other battles. The war ground on month after month, until finally, in August 1945, it ended. Rivers went home to Iowa. He returned to the farm, to the fields of corn, to the quiet life he had left behind. He didn't talk much about the war. When people asked, he gave short answers and changed the subject. The memories were too heavy, too complicated. How could he explain what it felt like to kill 46 men in one day? How could he describe the coldness that had filled him during those hours, the mechanical efficiency, the absence of emotion? How could he tell them that part of him had stayed in that foxhole on the ridge, crouched in the mud, listening to the jungle, waiting for the next enemy soldier to appear? He couldn't, so he stayed silent. He worked the farm, married a local girl, raised 3 children. He lived a long, quiet life. He died in 1987 at the age of 67, surrounded by family, far from the war that had defined him. But the story of that day on Bougainville lived on. It became part of the unit's history, passed down through generations of soldiers. It was studied in military schools as an example of individual initiative and defensive tactics. It was told and retold, sometimes with embellishments, sometimes with errors, but always with the same core truth. One man alone had held a critical position against overwhelming odds and had won. What made Nathan Rivers stand remarkable wasn't just the number of enemy soldiers he killed. It was the clarity of his decision-making under impossible circumstances. When the line collapsed, when his unit disappeared, when he found himself alone, he didn't panic. He didn't freeze. He didn't run. He assessed the situation, identified what needed to be done, and did it. That kind of clarity is rare. In combat, most men react instinctively. They follow orders, rely on training, move with their unit. When the structure breaks down, when the orders stop coming, when a unit dissolves, many soldiers lose their sense of purpose. They retreat. They hide. They wait for someone to tell them what to do. Rivers didn't wait. He made the decision himself. But his decision wasn't reckless or suicidal. He didn't stay because he wanted to die a hero. He stayed because he understood the tactical situation better than anyone else at that moment. He saw the trail, the terrain, the vulnerability of the flank. He realized that if he left, the consequences would ripple outward, endangering hundreds of other men. He weighed his own survival against the survival of his comrades, and he chose the harder path. That choice required not just courage, but also a deep sense of responsibility. Rivers could have justified leaving. His unit had abandoned him. After all, he had no radio, no support, no way to call for help. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Any reasonable person would have retreated. But Rivers didn't think in terms of what was reasonable. He thought in terms of what was necessary. And once he made the decision to stay, he executed it with discipline and intelligence. He didn't simply dig in and hope for the best. He studied the ground, planned his movements, used the terrain to his advantage. He fought smart, not just hard. He made the enemy believe they were facing a larger force, sowing confusion and hesitation. He can serve as ammunition, made every shot count, and moved constantly to avoid being pinned down. His tactics weren't taught in a manual. They came from his own mind, adapted on the fly to the specific situation he faced. That combination of moral courage and tactical intelligence is what separates extraordinary soldiers from ordinary ones. Many men are brave. Many men are skilled. But few can maintain clarity and discipline when everything falls apart, when the plan collapses, when they're utterly alone. Rivers' story also reveals something uncomfortable about war. He killed 46 human beings in a single day. 46 men with families, with homes, with lives. They weren't monsters. They were soldiers like him, following orders, trying to survive. Some were probably conscripts, forced into service. Some were probably terrified. In another time, another place, Rivers and those men might have had nothing to fight about. They might have been friends. But on that day, on that ridge, they were enemies. And Rivers killed them without hesitation, without mercy, without remorse. Not because he was cruel, but because war had reduced the situation to brutal simplicity. Kill or be killed. Survive or die. Hold the line or watch it collapse. That simplicity is what haunted Rivers for the rest of his life. In the moment, his actions made perfect sense. They were necessary. They were justified. But afterward, in the quiet years that followed, the simplicity dissolved into complexity. He remembered the faces of some men he had killed. He wondered about their families, their stories. He wondered if they had been good men or bad men, if they had believed in the war or hated it, if they had been brave or terrified. He would never know. All he knew was that he had ended their lives, and that weight never left him. This is a hidden cost of war that people rarely talk about. We focus on the dead, the wounded, the visible casualties. But we forget about the survivors, the men and women who carry the memory of what they did, what they saw, what they became. Rivers survived the war physically intact, but part of him died on that ridge. The part that believed life was simple, that right and wrong were clear, that killing could be done without consequences. That part never came home. Yet despite the cost, despite the complexity, despite the moral ambiguity, what Rivers did that day mattered. It mattered to the men whose lives were saved because the flank held. It mattered to the families who welcomed those men home after the war. It mattered to the outcome of the battle. And in a small way, to the outcome of the war itself. History is made of moments like these, small decisions by ordinary people that ripple outward in ways they can never fully see. Nathan Rivers didn't set out to be a hero. He didn't want glory or recognition. He just wanted to do his job, survive the war, and go home. But when the moment came, when he was tested in the hardest possible way, he didn't fail. He stood alone on that ridge and held the line, not because he was special, but because he chose to be. And that choice, more than any medal or commendation, defines who he was. In the end, Rivers' story isn't about killing 46 enemy soldiers. It's about the decision that came before the killing. It's about a young man standing in an empty trench, looking at an abandoned position, and choosing to stay. It's about the moment when fear and logic and self-preservation all screamed at him to run, and he ignored them. It's about the quiet, stubborn voice inside him that said, "This is where I'm needed. This is where I'll stand." That voice exists in all of us. Most of us will never face the kind of test Nathan Rivers faced. We won't have to hold a line against impossible odds. We won't have to make life and death decisions in the space of a heartbeat. But we all face smaller tests every day. Moments when we have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Moments when we have to decide whether to stay or run, to act or wait, to take responsibility or pass it to someone else. Rivers' story reminds us that those moments define us. Not the big moments, not the planned moments, but the unexpected ones. The moments when we're alone, when no one is watching, when we have every excuse to take the easy path. Those are the moments that reveal who we really are. Nathan Rivers was an ordinary man who did something extraordinary. He wasn't superhuman. He was scared, exhausted, and overwhelmed. But he stayed. He fought. He held the line. And because of that, he became something more than ordinary. He became a symbol of what humans are capable of when they refuse to give up, when they refuse to quit, when they choose to stand even when standing seems impossible. That's the lesson of his story. Not that we should seek out danger or try to be heroes, but that when the moment comes, when we're tested, when everything depends on us, we have it in us to stand. We have it in us to be brave. We have it in us to do what needs to be done. Nathan Rivers proved that on a ridge in Bougainville in November 1943, and his example echoes through the decades, reminding us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. It's the decision to stay when every instinct tells you to run. It's the quiet, stubborn refusal to abandon your post, no matter the cost. The line held that day, not because of tactics or firepower or luck, but because one man decided it would. One man made a choice. And sometimes in the chaos of war and life, one choice is all it takes. If you want more stories like this, stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary decisions of ordinary people, subscribe now. And wherever you're watching this from, leave a comment below. Let's keep these stories alive.